Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, so I think we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webcast, How to Solve Your J.D. Edwards Disaster Recovery Issues with a Cloud DR. My name is Joanne Casley, and I'm a Client Development Manager here at GSI, and I will be your MC for today. Our presenter for today's webcast is Bill Rem, and I'll be introducing him in just a minute. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and give you the opportunity to review our safe harbor statement. All right, and now for a quick overview for the agenda for today's webcast, which should last about 45 to 55 minutes in total. First, we'll go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. Then I'll provide a brief company overview before turning it over to Bill for the main presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll go over our upcoming educational events and then wrap up with a Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question during the webcast, you can do so through the questions panel, which is located at the bottom of the GoToWebinar console window, which should be on the right side of your screen. Please note that we do address all of the questions at the end of the presentation. If you would like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation, just click that red right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. And now for a brief overview of GSI for those of you joining us for the first time. GSI is a full-service cloud project consulting and managed services organization that was founded in 2004, and we now have offices nationwide with a global reach. We have been recognized twice on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest-growing companies in the U.S. and have over 100 employees. GSI is an Oracle Platinum Partner, NetSuite Certified Solutions Provider, Salesforce Consulting Partner, and MSP Partner for Oracle Cloud, AWS, and Microsoft Azure. We are also a founding member of the J.D. Edwards Global Alliance. GSI specializes in software implementations, project and business consulting, managed services, and cloud and hosting services. And all of our services are backed with our 100% guarantee. We are also a forward-thinking product development company that has many popular products, including Genius for advanced monitoring and performance analytics, Genesis for load, stress, and regression testing for system design, validation, or expansion. Both of these solutions can be used with any web-based business-critical system. We have G Shield, which is our two-factor authentication and password reset solution for J.D. Edwards. We have Rapid Reconciler, which is GSI's Oracle validated tool for inventory in transit and received and not vouchered reconciliation. Rapid Reconciler can be used with any version of J.D. Edwards, World, or E1. And finally, we have Rapid Approval, which is an enhanced user experience for Salesforce, making it easier to process a high volume of workflow approval requests and time and expense approvals. And now I would like to introduce Bill Rem, who is going to be our presenter for today's presentation. And Bill leads GSI's database practice and is certified on multiple database platforms. And he's been a J.D. Edwards CNC administrator for about 20 years. Besides hosting our webcast and running a practice, Bill conducts on-site training, creates video tutorials, and delivers presentations at conventions and user groups. And he also writes a monthly article in the GSI newsletter, the GSI Insider. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Bill.
All right, thank you. I'm going to switch. And I'm going to show my screen. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, and you are good to go.
All right. Get my screen all sorted out here. All right. Today we're going to be talking about using the cloud for a DR solution. And first I wanted to just give you this graphic here about what are we talking about here? This is called hybrid DR in the cloud, where you have an on-premise database in your data center or maybe in your building, and you use the cloud to do all your backups. And this is really for people or companies that maybe want to get into the cloud and start moving things over there, but maybe you don't fully trust the cloud yet, or it isn't quite ready for your production systems. Get a foothold in the cloud with your disaster recovery, makes it easier for you to continue to upgrade to the cloud with your production systems in the future. But let's talk a little bit about disaster recovery. I know not everybody is on the same page with that, so I'll tell you a little bit about that first. So disaster recovery is your plan to recover from disaster, obviously. Now, when most people think of a disaster, they think of a natural disaster or maybe a fire, tornado. A disaster could also be caused by losing your internet connection to your servers. Maybe there isn't some superhuman businessman ripping cables apart with his bare hands, but there are numerous examples of construction workers accidentally cutting service lines, which could take days to repair. So what's your plan to recover from a disaster? If you lose your entire database server, how do you get back in business? Do you fail over to a new server? What about replacing the equipment that died? Where do you buy the new equipment? Who will set it up? What if your server room is trashed? Who will rerun all the cables to the temporary room? Maybe your whole building is gone. What happens then? All of this should be written out in enough detail so that someone who is not familiar with your company or your systems can execute the plan. In my experience, a disaster is most likely to hit you when your DBA is on vacation. And you'll have to have junior techs or sometimes even consultants begin the recovery process. For real disaster recovery that can keep your business running no matter what, you need to have an identical setup of your production systems at another location that is constantly updated. Yes, that does mean 2 servers, 2 sets of data, and 2 of everything else you need for your production systems. You also need somewhere to store this equipment, someone to manage it, and so on. That can get pretty expensive. The cloud to the rescue. Well, maybe not that cloud, more like this cloud, the happy cloud. This is the cloud I'm talking about. You don't need to spec out hardware, switches, power supplies, or any of that. A service like Oracle Cloud has that ready to go. All you need to do is decide how much CPU, memory, storage, and bandwidth that you need, and Oracle takes care of all the rest. Some of you may have figured this out already, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The cloud is not some mysterious place with secret technologies. It's just a server at a data center. Yep, that's it. Cloud is just a pretty term for virtualized servers in a remote data center, otherwise known as someone else's computer. But that's not all you can use in the cloud. Each of the major cloud providers have a bare metal option, also known as standalone server in a rack. Oracle stretches the cloud definition even further with on-premise cloud, where they put physical servers in your own data center and then they just call it the cloud. And now what you've all been waiting for, how do you set up hybrid disaster recovery to the cloud? It's exactly the same as setting up DR anywhere else with any other method. The end. Thanks for attending the webcast. No, but seriously, maybe it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty darn close. And you know what? I'm going to show you how it's done. Now, on the Oracle Cloud, this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to show you how to do disaster recovery to the Oracle Cloud. So you'll have to set up an Oracle Cloud account. That's not in the scope of this demonstration. It'll be up to you to get that paid for and initialized. But if you just Google for Oracle Cloud sign in, it will take you to a page very similar to this. Once you're in the cloud, you may get dropped into the dashboard as soon as you sign in. So if you create a new account, you may see this. If you sign in, you may also see this. There's a couple different entry points for the cloud. When you come into here, if you see this screen, just click the Create Instance area to get started. And it takes you to this next page, which I think is kind of an unnecessary speed bump. I can sort of understand why they put this here, but it seems a little overly clicky to me. Anyway, just click Create next to Database, which is the one on the right there. This third click is really the last one you need before you get started creating the instance. Now, click that. So you have a couple questions here. You can do the hybrid DR wizard, which has a lot of prerequisites. You can't do rack, you can't do ASM. It has to be smaller than 2 terabytes. It can only be container databases, and you have to have transparent data encryption, and no other data guard configurations, and so on and so forth. So if you want to use the wizard, you're pretty limited on what you can do. Now you can also manually create your DR database. You're still limited by what the cloud has to offer, but you have a lot more flexibility in how you manage that server. I'll show you really quickly how to get through the hybrid DR wizard, and then I'll get to the meat of DR setup with a manual installation. And that's mainly because the manual installation is so much more detailed how to set it up, and it'll give you a lot of insight into how things happen in the background, even with the hybrid DR. So you gotta make sure you do all those prerequisites. It's a long list of things. I have some links inside of my webcast. The notes tell all of the information you need, so you don't have to take notes. And don't worry if you don't see it on the screen, because I do have it in there for you. So first thing you're gonna do is create a container, and this container will be deleted later. And you also have to download a source setup file. Then create an IP reservation, and finally, you run the DR setup on your source database. So let's go through that real quick. So to create a container, when you're in your dashboard, there's a little hamburger icon, I call it, the little 3 lines. And that drops open this dashboard here, and then you, under Services, you click Storage Classic from the menu. Now you need a container for both the wizard and the manual steps. So if you don't see any containers created yet, this is the screen that you will see. Now make sure you pick the correct region for your place. There's not too many to pick from, but I picked US Com Central-E, and then click Create Container. Now this may or may not come back successfully. Sometimes there could be some issues. If it doesn't work, you'll need to open a ticket with Oracle. Now, one thing you probably notice is I'm doing screenshots here, and that's mainly because the process of creating all of this takes kind of a lot longer than the webcast allows. So these are all these screenshots were taken when I was setting it up for the webcast. If you already have a container that you've created previously, your window is going to look like this, but it's still the same as before. Just click Create Container and do the same steps. Again, click Create Container. Then for, and the Create Container is very simple. Then for DR, you also need an IP reservation. You need that because without it, you'll get a new IP address every time you restart your instance. To get out of here and back to your dashboard, click on the hamburger and then click My Services. Now you're going to be clicking around forever, struggling to figure out how to create an IP reservation, and that's because it's really nowhere to be found. It doesn't exist yet. So here's what you have to do. You first click Create Service. And then you're basically going to create a fake service. So we're going to put the service name of temp in there in the upper left, and then nothing else. And well, you do have to pick a region. So put the temp in and pick a region, then click Next. Now you're going to be at the database configuration screen, but you won't create the database yet. You want to expand Advanced Settings down at the bottom. You can see on the bottom of the screen. So this is what that looks like, Advanced Settings. You see down at the very bottom of this, see on the, when you're actually doing this on the web, it's all going to be one screen that you scroll down, but here is Advanced Settings. At the bottom of that, it says IP reservations. You know, you'd think that since this is here on the setup screen, that you could easily create an IP reservation at the same time as a database instance. But let's see what happens when you click on the gear icon to the right. It says that creating an IP reservation has to be done in advance, but there's no way to create your first one without going through the creation. So I hope you didn't do a whole lot of setup in the previous screens. That's what I did. I went through the first time, put in all my information for my instance, and then got here and had to completely cancel out and go back and recreate the IP reservation. So anyway, you would click just click OK here, and then it takes you to that screen, and then here you can finally click Create. Again, the IP reservation is so that you don't get a different IP every time you bounce your system. So You give your IP reservation a name. I picked hybrid DR, and then you pick your same region and click OK. Now you get bumped back to the IP reservation screen, and then you see it being initialized. In the lower screenshot, it's done but unused. So there's two different. So the top one is before, the bottom one is after. Now this is the reason it says unused is because you haven't assigned it to the database yet. So now we can finally create our DR database. Now click the Services tab. It's not shown here, but click the Services tab above at the top of the screen to go back to the database screen. Now when you get back to your instance, you see across the top, it now has a tab for IP reservations, which was not there before. You actually have to already have an IP reservation created for that to show up. Now we can click Create Service and do the real thing. In the service, just fill out the information. When you put in your own name, your own description, it doesn't matter, your email, and you pick your region. When you pick this database type, you may have to click the other drop-downs repeatedly or wait a little bit before the hybrid DR option becomes available because these menu options don't always update as quickly as you'd think they should. And it may seem like you aren't going to get to choose it, but it eventually lets you do it. So once you get through that, you just click Next on that screen. In here, the database name you pick has to be the same name as your source database, which is on premises. So if your database at your company is called ORCL, you want to put that in here too. Password complexity is strictly enforced, so take that into consideration when you create your password. Now, I didn't create the compute shape here, but I didn't change the compute shape just because it doesn't matter to me, but Oracle database on the cloud can really not, it can't run with only one OCPU. You're going to want to pick two at a minimum. Now, the backup destination doesn't matter for our purposes, but in real life, you do need to pick one. Otherwise, if you don't pick a backup destination now, you may never be able to back it up at all, and you'll have to recreate it from scratch. So just another bug with the Oracle Cloud. You see at the bottom of the screen, you want to drop down the advanced settings and select your IP reservation that you created in the previous step. You see that down at the bottom where it says IP reservations. I called it hybrid DR, and that's the one we're going to use. Now, finally, it asks for the cloud storage container, but when I was working on this, I wasn't able to create it. So I'm going to skip that for now and move on to manual DR creation. And really, this is the last step for the hybrid DR wizard, is you create the container and put that information in, and then you're good to go. So we're going to skip on to manual DR. Now we're back at the same screen as before, but instead of picking the hybrid DR, I chose at the bottom right, I chose single instance. Same information otherwise, and I'm going to click Next. Now remember, when you set this up, you need to pick the amount of storage for your database. Obviously, it has to be big enough to contain your entire source database, and I'm also choosing none for the backups. I'm not creating the DR from an existing backup this time, but that is an option. You need an SSH key pair to use an Oracle Cloud database. In fact, pretty much any cloud database or server is going to need an SSH key pair. There's no root password, so you have to log in on Oracle Cloud, the OPC user. And the OPC user doesn't have a password either. You have to use the SSH key. And fortunately, you can create a new key right here on the screen. You don't have to back out and do it separately. I won't get too much into that, but it's super easy. Now, if you want backups, you will need to have a container for them. You create a backup container in the same way we did earlier, or would have done earlier for the hybrid DR. Now, don't be confused by the cloud storage container box above and the create cloud storage container box below. Checking that box below only creates what you need in your pre-built container, but it doesn't create it for you. So I know that's a little weird, but that's how it works. In advanced settings, you choose your port, your time zone, character set, national character set, and you also need an IP reservation like we created previously. And you can go with a standard port as well, it doesn't matter. The character set that you see there is the one that's required for JD Edwards databases. If this is not for a JD database, then you'll have to put in the correct one there. And also, if your character set on your existing source database is JD Edwards, but you didn't use that correct character set, you don't want to make this one different. They'll need to match. Now, at the final screen, you look over your settings, you make sure it all looks good. It's a real pain to go back through all this again, so if it's not, you want to get back and fix it. Once you're ready to go, just click the Create button. Sends you back to your primary screen, and it shows a little line that says the service is being created. And it's going to sit there for a little while. It took an hour and a half to create this instance. I thought it would be really fast, but what do I know? So you set aside at least an hour or 2 hours for that to happen. And this is the main reason why I couldn't demonstrate it real time. Now, once the database is up, you're good to go. This is the information screen. You've got one node, 2 CPUs, 15 gigs of memory, 717 gigs of storage. On the screen, you can see the connect string, which you would use to connect remotely to it. And we have no backup, and so on. Now, in order for your database to communicate with the outside world, you need to open some ports. So from the previous screen, you just double-click Oracle Database Cloud Service, which is up there. If you don't have that up or your service console isn't open, you can access it from that main dashboard that we've seen in the previous screens. So from here, you're going to click Create Service, and then scroll down there, Access Rules. You're going to need to open SSH, HTTP, HTTP SSL, and DB Listener at a minimum. You can open the rest if you like, but for the purpose of this demonstration, we're just going to do those 4. And you enable them just by going to the little stack on the very right and selecting Enable. Once you click Enable, it shows you this processing bar, and it happens pretty quickly. Now you can log into your newly created DR server. Now remember, you have to use that private key for connectivity. Private keys will work on any SSH client, MOBA Xterm, PuTTY, whatever you want. Just instead of putting in a password, you pick the SSH key tab. And you notice in this example, I have logged in as OPC, and then I sudo to Oracle. So the OPC user automatically has sudo access. Now you need to find the database files in the container database. You have to, and you see the select statements I have put up there. Everything that I show selecting here, you want to delete all of that. All the files that show up as a result of these queries. Then you need to find your PDB files and get this information, and then shut down the database. And now go out and delete all these files as well that you saw, except for the redo logs. So you're going to delete it. You're deleting all your PDBs, your CDBs, everything, except for redo logs. And then you shut down after you shut down the database. Now on your primary server, if you don't already have the flash recovery done, you need to have that to store the flashback files. And it's pretty much, if you know how to set up the data guard, this is going to be really similar. I have some queries inside the notes from my presentation, so I didn't have room to put them all on this screen. So just when you get the presentation, take a look at the notes. When you enable the FRA, you have to show the parameter DB recovery file dest size. If it shows nothing, then you want to show parameter DB recovery file dest, and if there's nothing there, then you have to alter system and set the DB recovery file dest size to something, 20 gigs or something. and then set the file destination as well. Next thing you got to do is enable archive log mode, and if you're not already in archive log mode, then you might have some other problems. But in order to enable archive logs, if they're not, you have to restart the database, so keep that in mind. And then force logging, that forces the database to put everything in its logs. And finally, enable the auto standby file management. I've got all these queries in there for you, so don't worry about looking those up. Next thing we're going to do is configure the redo transport. That's just a couple quick statements. What basically the statement tells that the DB recovery file destination is the location that they're going to archive to, and it should also be used to archive all the log files in all the roles, and that's for the database ORCL. Next thing is to set up the failure server by setting the transport of the archive logs to the standby database. Then you enable the archive destinations. All these queries are in here. So we're specifying where the database should look for missing archive logs if there's a gap. And it's used when the database is in the standby role and has a gap in the redo that it receives. So we need to let the database know what other databases are in the DataGuard configuration. Then you have to edit tnsnames.ora file on the primary database, and you add an entry for your standby database, CDB. Then you copy that tnsnames file in the primary database to the standby database's home. So you want to check the SQLnet.ora and listener.ora files on the primary and make sure all appropriate parameters are on the standby side. Then you're going to create a P file from the SP file and copy that file over to the DR server, as well as copying over the password file. So these files are located in the Oracle Home DBS directory, and then you'll have to adjust a couple of the parameters for the new database. And I've got those commands in the notes. And the transparent data encryption, you do have to copy the TDE files from the primary to the secondary if the source is encrypted. Now that's the one thing about doing the DR with just a server by having the database manually set up, is that you don't have to use transparent data encryption. If you use the hybrid DR wizard, you have to set up transparent data encryption, and that might not be something that your business wants to do. So now the standby database, first you got to make sure you don't have any standby log files already, and so there's a query in there to find those. And if there's none there, then you need to get the log file location information so you know where to create your standby redo logs. And you just select that from $log file. Then you query your current log group file information so you can calculate the size of and how many standby logs you need to create. So in the example, in the servers that I was using, the log files were 2 gigs and there were 4 threads with 1 thread per node, and each had 4 log groups. So the total number of standby logs you'll need can be calculated by the number of log groups per thread plus 1 times the number of threads. And I've got this written down in there, so don't worry about that. So in the server that I set up, I needed 5 standby log groups for that calculation. So I started numbering them with number 21 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. I did 21, 22, 23, 24, just because it bumps it out a lot further. And then you set your remote login password file. And on the standby server, when you edit the parameter file on the standby server, you have to verify that a whole bunch of things are set correctly. You know, your audit file destination, control files, so on and so forth. It's a long list that I have listed in the notes. And then you have to add a static entry to the listener.ora file for your DR database, and then you restart your database. Now, there's a few more steps to set up the standby. You got to make sure the password file and SP file are in the DBS directory. Now, all the file locations on the source need to be replicated on the target before you start your database duplication, or else it's going to fail. And once you have all those files duplicated, and it's kind of okay if you forget some, because if you start your DR sync, it's going to fail saying that that directory is not there. So it's just a matter of going out and creating that directory. Unfortunately, you have to delete everything that was created and start over from the beginning. Otherwise, it's going to fail because those files already exist. Anyway, once you have that all sorted out, you want to start the instance and create the SP file. So it's basically, I'm reading from the notes here, startup no mount, and you point to your P file. And then you create your SP file from the P file and you shut it down. And you start it back up with no mount, make sure it's being used, and then you should be good to go. Now, to see if you've got this all created right, you want to try to connect to the databases from each other. So you go from the primary database, you use SQL Plus, and you have your TNS names all in the right place. You SQL Plus from the primary to the secondary using the Easy Connect string, and then go to standby and do the same thing. All the problems that you usually have from this is because the TNS names is not set up correctly, or you don't have the same information on both servers. And then finally, you get to create the standby database. You have to have a lot of patience with this because it takes a long time when we're doing it this way. We're not doing it from a backup. We're letting the database create it on its own over the internet pipe. So you basically start the redo apply on standby, and then you watch it start to build it. You watch your logs being shipped over, and whenever it's done, it could take a day, it could take 2 days, a week, I'm not sure. It depends on many factors, the speed of your servers, the bandwidth of your pipe. But when it's done, you cancel the recovery when it's done, and then you open your standby database, which is several queries that are too long to tell you about, but they're in the notes. Once you have your databases up, you want to perform a switchover. First, you want to check your switchover status. You can see here we have the DR and the primary and the physical standby. They're ready to go. And then when we execute switchover, there's the command that we use to test the failover to DR. The final step to bringing up the DRDB is to do the steps in reverse. Is to you alter database, commit to switchover to the primary with session shutdown. That's an actual command you would have to type in. And like I said, if you've done DR switchovers, you'll understand how all this stuff works. And then you open the database, and you should be up and running on your DR standby. In order to switch back, you just do everything in that order, in reverse order to switch back. It's a lot better to use the DataGuard broker because it manages that all automatically. And the main reason I wanted to do this all manually for you so you could see what was going on in the background. In a future webcast, I will be showing how the DataGuard broker works and how that works with the hybrid DR. But essentially, it is if you're familiar with DataGuard or Active DataGuard, it probably will be very, very familiar to you. And that really is it in a nutshell, how to set up hybrid DR to the cloud. Joanne, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And there you go.
All right. Thank you so much for a great presentation. We have just a couple of quick things to go over, and then we'll move to the Q&A session of the webcast. So if anybody does have a question they would like to submit, please do that through the GoToWebinar console at this time. Today's webcast is a part of our ongoing educational webcast series. I have our upcoming webcast on the screen for you now. So if you'd like to register, you can do so at www.getgsi.com. In addition to our educational webcast, GSI has got a lot of great resources out on our website. There are links to our monthly newsletters, the GSI Insider. We have our resource center where you can actually access recordings of all of our past webcasts, read white papers, case studies, and a lot more. We also host workshops around the country. We've done some on, JD Edwards upgrades, moving to the cloud, that kind of thing. So again, you can go out to our website and check all of that out. Now we'll go ahead and move to the Q&A session. And it looks like we do have a question from Danielle. And it says, can this service be used if you are using an IBM AS400 system to run JD Edwards?
So on the AS400, that's a little more complicated. Replicating to a cloud service is, generally you're going to find Linux, Windows, and so maybe even Solaris systems that are going to be on the cloud. IBM has its own replication tools that it uses, and as far as I know, any cloud service related to AS400 is going to be just having another iSeries in the cloud. That being said, there are other services that do replicate AS400 data to other servers, such as Golden Gate, which is provided by Oracle. There's SNP. They do replication between iSeries and other platforms. So I think you're really looking at a little more complicated and definitely using third-party equipment to get that done.
All right, thank you, Bill. While we're waiting for a couple of other questions, I just want to mention that GSI will be out at Collaborate this year at booth 317. We also are giving 3 presentations, so if any of you are going to be there, please stop by and say hi. And that looks like that's the end of the questions. Bill, is there anything else that you'd like to wrap up with?
Yeah, I know that this is probably horribly complicated. It's unfortunately not a subject that can be fully covered in an hour, but hopefully I gave everybody enough detail to make their first foray into the cloud a little less scary. And please feel free to shoot me an email if you have any further questions.
Yep, absolutely. And I was going to mention that the contact information for both Bill and myself is on the screen for you now. And we do ask as you exit the webcast that you complete a quick 1-minute survey. When you do so, that will enter you into a drawing to win a $25 Amazon gift card. So again, we thank you for your time. Have a great day, and we hope to see you on a webcast in the near future.